my name is Paige, welcome to my channel. As you can see, we are well into August now, and so that means that I finally have to get my July wrap-up done. If you're new here, welcome. I post every Thursday and Saturday, but if you're a returning visitor and you did see my June wrap-up, then you remember me talking about the fact that I wanted to read more this month. I can tell you now that I didn't read less than I did last month, but I read exactly the same amount. So I'm coming to you today with 4 books I read during July. I actually think it was a pretty good reading month. It was actually all almost in the same genre, so I think I hit a high point of like wanting to read this genre specifically, and then I just completely fell off of reading. If you've seen my first sentence challenge, then you know that I was challenged to read The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. That was, I think, at the beginning of the month, and I still haven't finished it. It's not that it's a bad book or anything like that. In fact, I'm having a great time reading it. So I think I'm just reading kind of slow right now. Anyway, with that being said, I'm hoping that I can finally finish that book as well as like A Discovery Witch's Scythe. But anyway, let's get started with the books I finished in July. I'm also sorry if you can hear my dog snoring. He's a very heavy pit bull, and so he snores very loud, and I can't move him, and I don't want to, so just hear like a little grunting or like that, then I'm sorry. So the first book I finished in July was The Diviners by Libba Bray. So this is a young adult historical fiction fantasy, and it is the first book in a trilogy. I think the author also wrote A Great and Terrible Beauty. I've heard mixed reviews about that series, so if you've read it or you have an opinion on it, please let me know, because I am considering reading it after reading this book, because I actually really like her writing style. But anyway, The Diviners is set in the 20s, and it takes place in New York. It's multiple perspectives. So it mainly follows a girl named Evie, 2 boys, Jericho and Memphis, and another girl named Theta. There are actually a lot of other characters that I'm just not mentioning at this current moment because that would take the whole video. But essentially it's about Evie, who is kind of the wannabe it girl. She wants the limelight and doesn't necessarily have it in the town that she's from, so she kind of takes advantage of these psychic powers that she has, and in doing that gets herself into trouble with a few of the townsfolk for predicting something that definitely could have been left probably in the dark. And because of this trouble she gets herself into, her parents decide to send her off to live with her Uncle Will in the city of New York. Her Uncle Will owns and operates this sort of strange oddities museum that deals with the supernatural, has a lot of artifacts about the supernatural, stuff like that. And so when she goes to stay with him, she kind of keeps those psychic powers hidden a little bit because she feels kind of intimidated by how much he knows about the arcane. But when a string of murders starts to happen, Evie realizes that they have to do with dreams she's been having about certain symbols and things like that, and she discovers that maybe she can help solve the mystery of this killer. Going off of that sort of synopsis I created for the book, basically the first thing I can say about this book is that it's very dark, a little bit whimsical, a little bit hard to immediately grasp. There's a lot of supernatural, very latently supernatural themes happening in this book that you don't immediately pick up on. This is a true mystery novel where you are trying to figure out the motives of this killer and how Evie fits into their plans, as well as how all the other perspectives tie in to this whole big scheme of darkness that's basically happening right in the heart of New York. I'm not an historian, so I can't really give you like a detailed review of how realistic the setting was, but it felt realistic to me, and I think maybe a lot of that doesn't even have to do with the setting, and it more so has to do with how well the characters are built up. Even the smallest characters in this novel have motivation. They have realistic motivation. There was never a character that walked in that did exactly what I wanted them to do, exactly what they were supposed to do to carry the story forward, which is nice because a lot of times in books, we know when a side character pops up, it's to fulfill a very specific purpose, a very limited purpose, and most of the side characters that show up kind of more so add to the mystery more than they add to just keeping the story running. Like, there was a lot of setup that I will probably understand more if I read the rest of the series, but even if I don't, it was very interesting and very thought-provoking to have them show up. I'll put a spoiler warning here because I don't want to spoil anyone for the killer and everything like that. But I also really like the fact that the victims, you get their perspective too, and they each have their own unique story. So it's not like side characters that are set up like dominoes to fall and without ever actually having any more than like a cardboard, my name is Kaylee and I just died. You know what I mean? While we're still in spoilers, I will say that the ending was maybe a little bit predictable, like, and with saying that, I think that I might feel that way because the rest of the book is so unpredictable that me figuring out the ending just felt like strange. I know that sounds negative, and I'm absolutely not being negative about this book whatsoever. I just thought I'd give you a couple of cons while I can think about them. But overall, I think I gave this book like 5 stars because I was very impressed by it. I probably will continue with the series, but I really don't know. So we're just gonna have to see about that. I'm hoping I do, but then again, I don't really know what the reviews are for the other half of the series. I'm not sure if it's one of those series that gets better or worse as it goes on, and I'd like to know that before I go in because I don't want to invest that much time and then find out that it's like bad. So if you know, let me know. So the next book I finished in July was I'm Traveling Alone by Samuel Bjork. Bjork. I don't know. I started this book probably a year ago at this point. For my senior project in college, I was writing a fiction novel and I had to choose books that I thought would be inspiration to me, like a reading list over the summer, and I kind of picked around, got some suggestions for mystery novels, and I got about halfway through a year ago, wrote my like critical analysis senior thesis using this book as sort of a reference, and then I just never finished it. I wasn't happy leaving it that way because it's one of the few international novels I've actually started. It's actually set in Norway, so it's been translated to English. It's a very good translation, so I'll say that off the bat. This book is actually the first in a crime or mystery series. I think the second book in the series has also been translated into English. I just haven't bought it. Primarily, this book is dual perspective, but occasionally another perspective pops in. It mainly follows Mia Kruger and Holger Munch. They are both detectives, but Mia is kind of like the prodigy of the detectives or the police squad. When the novel opens up, she's having a really rough time because her sister and I'm pretty sure both of her parents passed. So she is actually struggling with a drug problem, even maybe a drinking problem when the novel opens up. But because of a series of murders that begin to happen around Oslo, Holger, who was her partner for a long time, shows up and basically begs for her help on the case. These murders that are happening are actually pretty horrific. It's a string of children that are being murdered who are kidnapped, killed, and then dressed to look like they're traveling to school, hence the name I'm Traveling Alone. So they have very bizarre clothing on, almost like Victorian doll clothes. They're very clean. It's a very weird setup. Kind of in the background of this novel, there is a cult, and you're not sure whether or not they're directly involved in these murders. So the church has very questionable connections to a certain investigator's family, and there's also a lot of history that the reader has to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out the mystery of this book. You don't know firsthand what the history is between Mia and Holger, what they've gone through, what cases they've worked on, but you kind of get fed that information throughout the book. So you can try to put things together, but it is very hard, I will say that. And it's a very tightly packed novel, so it's actually not very long, but there's a lot of information being thrown at you. I think that's why I actually couldn't finish it until this year, because I was having a hard time with all of the work I was doing for school and just everything else. It was hard for me to read that book and focus enough that I felt like I was solving the mystery instead of just like having a mystery thrown at me. No information that is ever given to you in this book is unnecessary. Everything is important to finally come to the same conclusion that they come to, so it's important to be keeping a close eye on things. Overall, it's a very meticulous, very well written novel. With that being said, I think I will probably go ahead and read the second book in the series because it has been translated. I just probably won't get to that for a while. If you like those kind of very calculated, well-written mystery novels that every detail is important, then this would definitely be the book for you, and it would give you maybe a little bit of culture while you're at it, because I need to do more of that. I need to read more international novels. Maybe you need some more too, so this is a really good option. So moving on, the next book I read was The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. Also, if you're wondering why I don't have any tea today, that's because I'm already really hot, because I really wanted to wear this sweater even though it's summer, because I pretend like it's fall even when it's not. So we can't have any tea today because I'll actually have a heat stroke. So this book actually has mixed reviews. However, and I'll say this off the bat before I even get into the synopsis of this book, I thought this was a really good example of a well-written mystery novel, because the mystery itself is not simple. I definitely wouldn't call it simple, because I kind of predicted the ending. I had that as one of my predictions, but it wasn't probably even my first choice. I listened to the audiobook of this, and if you are interested in also reading the audiobook, I highly recommend it. There's multiple narrators, which is really fun considering this is split between 3 perspectives, 3 different women. Basically, the story follows Rachel, who is a divorced alcoholic, and she is out of a job. So she travels to London every day by train to feel like she's in the same schedule, and also kind of convince her roommate that she is still working, because she hasn't broken the news to her that she's not yet. So every day as she heads to London, she passes where she used to live, because she had a house with her husband on the side of the train tracks. Her husband is now married to the woman that he cheated on her with. So that's difficult. So they have a kid together and they seem really happy. And then beside her old house is another house that she always watches when she goes by on the train. And it's a young couple who lives there, and she always kind of sees them on the patio or the... I don't know. She always sees them out there, and she kind of imagines their story, almost like they're fictional characters. So she calls them Jess and Jason, and, you know, imagines their life and how perfect it must be. And then one day she sees another man on the porch with Jess, and it's not her husband, and it's clear potentially that this is a romantic relationship. So she sees that, and the next thing you know, the girl who lives in that house goes missing. The novel is kind of about Rachel trying to plead her case with the police, with whoever will listen, that she saw this girl who she doesn't actually know cheating on her husband. She's trying to help the police figure out who the culprit is for this girl's disappearance. So she figures that she saw evidence that another man is involved, potentially the murderer, and so she feels like she has to convince the police that she's sound of mind, regardless of whether or not she's an alcoholic. But she has so much history with her ex-husband kind of against her. When Rachel gets drunk, which is often, she ends up calling her ex-husband a lot, or stopping by their house, and it turns out that she is intoxicated and loses her memory the same night that the girl in question goes missing. That's why it's multiple perspective, because it follows Rachel, of course, but it also follows the missing girl, Jess, and it follows Rachel's ex-husband's wife. Really well set up. They're perfectly paced, perfectly timed, the way that the author switches between those perspectives. Now, spoiler warning, so that I can get into the ending. Rachel's ex-husband was a very suspicious character to me, and not in the way that I thought he could be the culprit. It was barely even a possibility in my mind, but he was very interesting because Rachel seemed to adore him almost supernaturally, like she was almost like obsessed with him. And I kept thinking, this is either because the relationship was abusive, or it was because he really is like just that great of a guy, because Rachel was constantly singing his praises. But with the way that he dealt with Rachel, it did seem like he was sincere. I guess like he did seem kind, and so when a lot of other suspects were introduced and given a lot of screen time, I pushed Rachel's ex-husband to the side because I wasn't really worried about him being the culprit. But there was a point, and it was relatively early on, so it wasn't actually that late in the book, but it bumped up my suspicion level a bit. It was a part where her ex-husband, it was in the perspective of his new wife, and they were having a conversation about Rachel. And up until this point, the only impression I had of him was that he seemed very kind. Like he was always trying to help Rachel regardless of whether or not she was kind of ruining his life. And in this conversation he was having with his new wife, he made a very nasty comment about Rachel. It was a very derogatory statement about her weight. It was a very mean thing to say, and I was like blown away because I had only witnessed him as being kind, and if you're a truly kind person, you wouldn't say that sort of thing. As soon as I really had him forefront in my mind as a suspect, I was like, wow, because that was really well set up. It really was. Superb. Really great mystery. Yeah, I think I gave it 5 stars, so yes. Okay, let's finish off this video with the 4th book I read in July, which was Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Caine. I want to do this before my camera dies. Please don't die yet. Okay. Stillhouse Lake was one of the books I got in my Barnes & Noble haul that I got online. Basically, it follows a woman named Gina Royal. At least that's what she goes by in the beginning. And Gina has 2 beautiful children with her husband, who she seems to adore. And basically, the beginning, what they throw you into at the beginning of this book is Gina comes home with her kids, and as she pulls onto her street, it's completely blocked by police cars, bystanders, everything, and she sees that a car has run into her garage, like just went off the road, boof. She freaks out, she goes and asks the police, like, hey, I live here, my garage, and they immediately arrest her because it turns out that when this random guy went and accidentally like flew off the road and into their garage, he discovered a dead body. Turns out that her husband is actually a serial killer who has been murdering young girls for quite a long time and using their garage as like his workshop. You could argue that, you know, why wouldn't she notice, but that's actually addressed a lot throughout the book. Like, why didn't I notice? That's like a big point of struggle for her, the fact that she didn't know what was going on in her own home. And so he goes away to jail, and then she has to kind of protect herself and her kids from all of this online backlash, because people assume that she knew what her husband was doing. They assume that she knew about the murders, that she was involved, so they like really hunt her down. Why is Siri trying to... Did I say anything that even sounded like her name? Because she just came on, so great. I guess the government is watching me, it's fine. I didn't murder anyone. Anyway, so the book is about her constantly relocating with her children to get away from these online presences that are actually threatening her and her family. And it's actually just more about her development as like, from a woman who kind of took everything at face value from her husband to an independent mother, a single mother. And I think that was the best part of the book. The mystery itself actually fell flat for me, I'm not gonna lie, and I can get into that maybe a little bit later, but the family dynamic between the 3 of them was really pretty untouchable. Like, that was pretty solid, and I liked the realistic representation of teenagers, because I mean her kids are going through those like tough times anyway that you have growing up, and they're doing that while knowing that their father was a serial killer. So it's really about her being like having to juggle telling them too much and telling them too little about what happened with their father. But basically the complication of this book is that where they relocate, which is called Stillhouse Lake, they end up renting a really nice lake house, and then I don't know, a few weeks later, a body turns up in the lake. Who is killing these girls? Does it have anything to do with her husband? Does it have anything to do with the online people that are after her? Just all of that stuff. So yeah, I thought it was actually a really solid story. Spoiler warning, because I will say a little bit about why I didn't like the end, but I didn't like the end because it felt like one of those mystery novels that I couldn't predict because it wrapped up to be unpredictable. Like, it didn't wrap up because it logically made sense that this person was the villain and this. It wrapped up that way, it felt like, because, you know, the author didn't want me to predict who the killer was, which is fine. Like I said, I'm fine with not being able to predict an ending. In fact, I prefer that if possible, but I don't like an ending that I didn't even consider, and not because, you know, like, I just ignored the signs, but because, like, there really weren't any. With that being said, I think the book as a whole was actually really good. Don't think I'll be reading the second book though, because this is a duology and I just don't see what I would need from the second book. Now then, we are at the end of this video. I gave you 4 books today because I didn't read anything else, guys, again. I told you you should never tell yourself that you're going to read more in a month, because you always read either less or the same. So I'm not going to say anything about what I'll read in August because I have high hopes for myself and I don't want to disappoint myself. So I know for sure I have to finish the Scorpio races. I did start The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Really enjoying it so far, but I am listening to it over audiobook, so that might take a while for me to get through because it's like 24 hours or something ridiculous. So I have a really fun video that's already filmed for you on Saturday. It is another baking video with a recipe from another book that is really, really fun. Like, I actually had a lot of fun and I'm still eating what we made now. So keep an eye out for that. If you haven't subscribed, then please do, and hit the bell to get notifications when I post. Like and comment on this video. Let me know what you thought about it. And yeah, I will see you back here on Saturday. Bye!